Hey everybody, today I'm going to review the Irwin VISE-GRIP self-adjusting wire strippers. Now I've owned this particular pair for well over the last year, and I got to tell you, after getting this, it was a huge upgrade over the older pair of Craftsman wire strippers that I was using before. And really the main difference that I like the most is the fact that there's no longer little grooves you have to line up with the wire you're working with and hope you pick the right one to strip the insulation off. This is going to automatically resize to no matter what size wire you're using. So it can go as small as 24 gauge wire all the way up to 10 gauge wire. It's going to do all the adjusting and you don't have to line anything up other than to push the wire through the top correctly. Here's a closer look at the self-adjusting wire strippers, and I want to point out the fact of how this actually operates. There are three distinct features. The first is going to be a pair of wire cutters right here near the pivot point underneath. That's where you're going to stick a piece of wire, slide it through there, squeeze it shut, and it's going to cut it right off. Directly underneath of that is where you're going to use terminal connectors as far as crimping them. So after you slide the wire in place, you'll squeeze that shut and it's going to crimp that connection on the end of the wire. Then the top is where we're actually going to strip the insulation off. Now this is a very unique way to strip wires. It doesn't have a little groove you have to line it up in. You can see it's a very wide slot that does have teeth built into it. And that is going to actually grab onto the insulation and the wire and not let go. So if we take a slow motion look at this of how it actually operates, as we squeeze the handle, the one side is going to come down, grab onto the wire and the insulation, then the second side is going to come down, and then they're going to pull apart. Now this first side has many teeth, that's going to grab on and not let go. The second side only has one tooth on the bottom and one tooth on the top. So what that's going to do is break the insulation and literally pull it off of the wire underneath. Because this not only has the ability to strip wires, but it also can cut them and crimp them, what we're going to do is with this 12 gauge automotive wire demonstrate all of that. So the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and set the depth that I want to cut this. Now, I really want to only cut about a ½ inch off. So I'll move the depth gauge up, move it over to the ½ inch mark. Now when I slide the wire in place, I'm only pulling off a ½ inch of insulation. So I can take the wires inside, spin them around so they're nice and tight, take one of the connectors, put it right over the end, and now I need to crimp this connection. So right here in the base you can see we'll line that up. Go ahead and just crimp that connection. It's going to make it nice and tight. At this point we could slide another wire on the other side, crimp it, and then we would have a good connection. But let's say we messed up or you're removing wires, because the wire cutters are also right in there, we can line this up with the wire cutter, squeeze it tight, it's going to cut the wire right off, and this would be ready to re-strip at this point. One of the main advantages, of course, is the fact that this is going to self-adjust depending on the size and type of wire that you're using. So I have a wide variety here, from household wiring to automotive wiring, all the way to speaker and HVAC wire. What we'll do next is take a look at each of these and see how the wire strippers actually perform. When we take a closer look at telephone wire, you can see although it does look fairly thick, inside of the sheathing is actually 4 individual wires, each of those being a solid 24 gauge wire. So what we'll do first is just pop the sheathing off. It's going to pull that off without damaging anything. Then underneath you can see the 4 individual wires. Now rather than strip these individually, we'll also put them side by side, line them up in the wire stripper. It's going to pull that sheathing off exactly the same length. Underneath the wires are not damaged, and at this point they'd be ready to connect. For things like these light fixtures, it really makes it easy because you can really get things done very quickly and you don't have to fool around with trying to line it up with the correct groove on an older pair of wire strippers. Now I do want to point out the fact that these do have 2 different gauges of wire. This one is actually a temporary light. Like let's say somebody was roughing in a house and you want your temporary lighting with just a standard light bulb hanging down from all the light fixtures. This is going to be a 14 gauge stranded. But when we look at the next wire, which is going to be for an exterior light, this is actually going to be a 16 gauge stranded wire. So these are completely different as far as the thicknesses go, but the operation, like I said, is going to be exactly the same thing. For the temporary one, we can go ahead and pop one in there, ratchet it, it's going to pop it right off. We'll go ahead and put the black in there exactly the same way. So at this point, we could tie it together with our 12-2 Romex, put some wire nuts on there, and then we would have light. Now if you are going to be doing the exterior, it's going to be exactly the same way. We can line the wire up in that, strip it right off, and the good thing is, even though this is very thin stranded wire inside, it did not strip any wires off along with the insulation. It only pulled that insulation off, and all these thin wires are still there and none have been broken. Now let's say you need to rewire up your trailer because your dog's crawled underneath of it and then chewed the wires up. You can take a brand new 4-prong connector like this one that does have 4 wires coming out of the end of it. Rather than stripping these individually and having different lengths, what we can go ahead and do is just strip them all at the exact same time. So I'll go ahead and take all 4 of them, put them side by side, place them in the jaws, and then with just a quick ratchet, all 4 of them are going to be stripped exactly the same lengths. Another really beneficial feature of the VISE-GRIPs is the fact that it can remove the exterior sheathing off of household wiring. Now both of these are going to be 12-2 wire, which means that it has 12 gauge solid wires inside of here, and there's going to be 3 total wires inside of each of these. There's going to be a bare copper ground and then a hot and a neutral. So what we'll do now is go ahead, pull the sheathing off of these, and the reason that I do have 2 of them, the yellow is going to be an interior grade, which is just going to be a hollow little shell. And then the gray is designed to be buried outdoors, and it's completely form-fitted around the wires inside. So the nice thing, like I said, about the VISE-GRIPs is the fact that it can remove that exterior sheathing without damaging or nicking the wires underneath. So to start out, what we'll do is go ahead and take the yellow interior grade, place it in the VISE-GRIPs, and then just ratchet the handle. It's going to break that sheathing free, and we can pull it right off. Now we'll pull back the paper protective layer, pull that out of the way, remove our ground out of the way, and now we can strip the 2 wires individually. So starting out with the white wire, we'll place it in there. It's going to strip that right off. And then moving it around, we can take the black wire and do the exact same thing. Now, the real nice feature with this exterior is the fact that you're not going to have to take a razor blade to cut this sheathing off. It's just going to pull it right off of there exactly the same way. So you can see it's going to break that free. I can go ahead and just pull this the rest of the way. And if we take a closer look at this, you can see it is completely molded around the wires inside. So it is not hollow. It is really one solid piece of plastic. Now the wires inside do have thicker insulation than your interior household wires. We can pop those in place. It's going to pop the sheathing right off. And then when we go over to the black, it's going to do it exactly the same way. Now as far as the limitations go, it is going to be size limitations. So taking a look at this 6-gauge battery cable, you can see the insulation in the wire will not even fit in the jaws, and that's why it can't strip something this large. Now finally, let's talk about automotive wires. I have 2 different types here, a thinner 18-gauge, which is the black wire, and a thicker 12-gauge, which is the red wire. Now anytime you do anything electrical with your vehicle, let's say you want to add on some aftermarket fog lights, this is the type of wire you would run to power that. Now what I want to do is go ahead, strip both of these because they are 2 different thicknesses. Both are stranded, but typically if you do this and let's say you use a razor blade, you'll nick the wires underneath, cut some of them, and then you're never going to have a good connection. So first, taking a look at that thinner 18 gauge, you can see we can slide it right into place. I'll go ahead and just move the depth gauge out of the way. We'll slide it right through the jaws, pop it right off, and even though it did pull the insulation off, none of the wires came along with it. And if we take a real close look at this, you can see the stranded wire is made up of at least 50 or 60 individual wires underneath, and none were cut. So at this point, we could just spin it around, and we'd be ready to crimp a terminal in the end. Now looking at that larger 12-gauge wire, we'll put it through exactly the same way, pull the insulation off, and you can see only the insulation was cut, none of the wires, exactly the same way. We can spin that around, and this would be ready for a connection. So now you've seen the Irwin VISE-GRIP self-adjusting wire strippers for yourself. And through that testing, I think you can see right off the bat how well they perform, no matter what size wire we're using. Now, the real nice thing is the fact that it's pulling that insulation off. It's not breaking through and tearing any of the wire underneath, and that's really important when you're dealing with stranded wire, because a lot of times with the older pair, if you do pick the wrong slot, it's not only going to cut the insulation, but it's also going to cut into those wires, and then you're really only having about half the wires make the connection. So with something like this, it is going to pull the insulation off, and it's not going to damage the wires underneath. Now another real nice feature is that little stop, so we could get very even cuts every time consistently. And if you were, let's say, wiring up a stereo in your vehicle, that would be really important. Now overall, I'll say for the money, these are about 20 bucks. And I gotta tell you, it really saves you a lot of time, and I think it does a really good job. If you like this video, please click like. If you like my channel, please click subscribe. And thanks for watching.